I'm Carin, and I'm an alcoholic. Carin with an A. A big A. It's good to be here tonight. You look great. You do. You look great. You look great to me. You're who I need to be seeing tonight. My sobriety date is September the 8th, 1988. And that means in a couple of weeks, I will celebrate 37 years of continuous sobriety. Yeah, it's like looking to see who that is. It's a long time. Anyway, we're going to do the fifth step tonight. This is, I want to recap just 2 seconds. How many people have been coming since the first step? Good. So, just to recap, we're all living here tonight in the first step. We're powerless over alcohol when we drink it. And my life is unmanageable when I'm not. And I've had a full week of unmanageability while I'm sober. So I absolutely understand the second half of the first step. Second step tells us, I got to come to believe in something that's going to get me out of this because I can't figure out how to do it myself. So it doesn't really matter what it is. It doesn't tell you what it is. You can believe in anything you want, but you better believe in something other than yourself to take you through this thing. And you get to the third step, which says you make a decision, which is difficult for us because if you're like me, I made 100 decisions. I did nothing. But in this particular step, you make a decision to turn your will and your life over to the care of whatever it is that you decided to call this thing. I don't know what it is, but I will tell you that if you make a decision and you don't do anything about that decision, I will see you here the following week while you pick up your next white chip. So you make a decision and you do something. And then, last week we talked about making a fearless and searching moral inventory of ourselves, which, turns out at the end, turns out to be a very small step of freedom. And we begin to release, on paper. Somewhere I decided to go look for my fourth step. And then when I've moved recently to Florida. So I don't know where it is, but I know it's here somewhere. Anyway, so the fourth step was painful. Clearly painful, putting all that stuff on paper, and it didn't feel good. And the reason it didn't feel good is because it's not supposed to feel good. It's supposed to feel bad. You're putting things on a piece of paper that you don't want, that nobody knows about you. Nobody's ever heard you. I mean, even the questions that I read from Clancy, pretty much tell you that this is the time in your work of the steps that you got to get all this stuff on paper. Doesn't really matter. But nobody knows this about me. Nobody. If you're an alcoholic like me, and you probably are, I don't know how to get out of pain except to drink or use. So I'm finished with my fourth step, and I'm in a great deal of pain. And, some of the old timers had said, when you finish your fourth step, you're going to feel great. You're going to feel relieved. I didn't feel any of those things. I felt bad. I felt bad enough that I thought that I needed something to medicate my badness. And so my sponsor said, yes, there's absolutely a medicine that you can medicate with for your badness. And that means going to do a fifth step immediately. That's the step of relief. It's an immediate fifth step if you wait. And I have to tell you, I've sponsored, I don't know, probably hundreds of people at this point. And anybody that waits to do the fifth step after their fourth step invariably lives in so much pain that they have to figure out a way to medicate. I'm just saying. So after your fourth step, don't even think about it. Go right into your fifth step. They're easy to do, by the way, but you don't figure that out until after you've done them. While you're doing them, they don't seem so easy. But when you're done with them, you're like, oh, that wasn't so hard. That was easy to do. And you have to remember that because the goal of this is when you're done with the steps is to go out there and do the steps with somebody else. So when they look at you at your fourth and fifth step and they think they're going to die from putting on, you can say, nah, it's not that bad. I got through it. It's not as bad as you think. So one thing I want to say about step 5 is non-negotiable. In my 12 and 12, I've made notes through the years, whatever step I was on, I wrote things that meant something to me and blah, blah, blah. There's only one thing that I have written in the entire fifth step in my 12 and 12, and that is, it is non-negotiable. So what does that mean? That means, for me, that meant if you don't do it, you'll drink. There it is. By the way, that's not my opinion. That's right in the big book. You can go and look it up after the meeting. It absolutely says those who skimp on this step and don't do this step, and even long-timers and old-timers that don't do a thorough job on their fifth step, they will drink. So it's not my opinion. It's a fact right in the big book. Okay, so the other thing about step 5, which I just love, but I don't understand it. So someday I'm going to meet someone who's going to explain this to me. Why in the big book it tells us from the 5th step we find out what our purpose is in AA. I don't know why they stuck it in the 5th step, but they did. And they said to me personally that the purpose of AA, the purpose of being a sober alcoholic in AA, is to fit myself to be of maximum service to God and the fellows around me. So, that's why we're here. We're not even here to get sober, by the way. We're not here to be good people. We're not here to do anything except to fit myself. And that's a really interesting word, to make myself fit, to do something. Like when you're at the gym, to get fit, you have to do work. To fit myself to be of maximum service, not half measures. To be maximum service to God. I really don't know how to do that. And to the fellows around me, and I really don't know how to do that either. But that's what it tells me, and they stick it in the 5th step. And the third thing is that I'm about to expose myself to another human being. And I'm going to expose things about myself that I think, by the way, that nobody could possibly understand. It's probably the greatest gift that we find out at Alcoholics Anonymous is that, first of all, my sponsor yawned, I need to tell you, and I had some really juicy bits in there. He yawned throughout the whole thing. And I have a feeling that there was a sponsor school at that point where they told all the sponsors, just yawn in the middle so they don't think that they're all that. But I spoke to him thinking that I was going to tell him things about me that he couldn't possibly understand. And, of course, that, he might wind up judging me. And, if you're an alcoholic like me, I did not have a single person in my life who knew everything about me. I knew a lot of people. I had a lot of friends, that's in air quotes, friends, and each of these friends knew a little bit about me. Just a little bit, just enough that I would let out so you would think we were close. So you would think I was telling the truth. My biggest fear is that somebody would throw me a big party and invite all these people in one room, and they would all start talking to each other, and then they would realize they would put this whole picture together of what I was as a human being, and then they're out the door. That was a big fear of mine. And so what I was told is that don't worry about that. There's nothing you can say to whoever you do this 5th step with. That's, first of all, I'm a good one to do the 5th step with because I don't remember anything. I remember nothing. You come to me the next week and now I want to add to it. I don't remember what you said to begin with. I don't know. And the other thing is that I don't care. And those are the two really important things when you think about doing your 5th step, that the person who's listening to you doesn't know, doesn't remember, and they don't care. You're taking up 2 or 3 hours of their time. If you slept with a lot of people and you have all those people on there and you're putting all that, so maybe it's more than 2 hours that you're sitting together. But the reality is that I don't care. I really don't care what you say. I know that you have to say it. I know that you have to do it. But the particulars of what you say, I don't care. And that's not caring. That's love. Because if I cared, you would think that they mattered. You would think that they held more weight than they do. And so that was really important to me. So then the last thing that I was told, before I began my 5th step was the worst. The first thing my sponsor says is don't lie. Now, I come from the school, my sponsor would say to me, when I was new in AA, you don't have to do anything, but, don't drink today. So I didn't drink for the day. And then, a week later, don't drink and get to a meeting. So I didn't drink and I get to a meeting. And then don't drink and don't drug and get to a meeting. And I would do that too. So maybe the 5th or 6th week, he said, don't drink, don't drug, go to a meeting and don't lie. And it's over now. It's over now. I'm not going to be one of these alcoholics who can stay sober. I am constitutionally incapable of being honest with myself. They wrote it right there. It had my name on it. So don't lie. Here's a worse one. Don't hold back. Don't hold back. Don't omit anything. Because anything that you omit is going to fester and grow, and eventually it's going to take over. Because that's the nature of alcoholism. We create these problems, we think about them, we water them, we weed them, we prune them until they're absolutely enormous. Once you get rid of them, they hold no weight at all. And here's the other one, and I think he just said that because I'm me. He said, don't embellish. When we do these awful, awful things out there when we were drinking or when we weren't drinking, it's a lot of fun to be able to embellish and tell a big story about it. He said, do not embellish. So I didn't embellish. So this is all about how you do this step, which I really don't care about. You're going to do the step. Everybody does it the way they're going to do it. So I want to get this stuff out really quickly, and then I want to talk about the really important part of the fifth step, which is not doing it. Who do you share your step with? Who do you do this with? So, logic tells you your sponsor. I did mine with my sponsor. I feel, and I still feel strongly, and I'm sorry. I mean, I've systematically insulted over probably everybody in this room by now, but the reality is that if you can't do your fifth step with your sponsor, get another sponsor. That's it. If you can't trust your sponsor, because that's the first trustworthy relationship that you've created in the rooms of AA. That's the first person you trust is your sponsor. And if you can't do your step with your sponsor, say, thanks so much, good to know you, I have to get somebody else, and get another sponsor. I have been called in plenty of times when somebody needed to do a fifth step and they couldn't do their sponsor, they couldn't use their sponsor. And I would say, what's wrong with your sponsor? He doesn't understand. Go use your sponsor. So that's how you do that. You talk to God. You tell God what you did, tell yourself what you did because you wrote it down. You tell a sponsor what you did. You hope all three of those stories match and there's no difference, between what you wrote and what you told somebody else and what you told God. They all got to be the same, whatever it is that you're doing. And then you got to sit there and you got to look at somebody, while you're doing this, which is humiliating. You got to look at them. So I was living in Manhattan. We did, our fifth steps. We would do them in the AA room and find a corner somewhere, and it worked really well. And then I moved out of Manhattan, and I moved to North Carolina. And Clancy said, I have the best way for you to listen to fifth steps. I said, how do you do it? He said, you get in your car with a flashlight at night, and you put the pigeon in the passenger seat. So they can't really read what they've written. They can't explain it. They just have to read it and then take a drive. He says, and take a 2-hour drive. I cannot tell you how many fifth steps I have heard in the front seat of a car while I'm driving down a country road that I don't know where we're going. And this kid, woman, man next to me with a flashlight is reading me everything that's on their page. And every few minutes I say, don't explain, just read. And very free. So that's how you do the fifth step. I don't think anybody's got any questions about that. It's pretty clear in the book. But I want to talk about now, not so much how I did it or how I even sponsor other people to do it, but I want to talk more about what I see as a result in me once I did it. That's a lot different than focusing on how do you do a fifth step. After I did my fifth step, I did all my steps in my first year of sobriety. So we're talking about 6 months into sobriety. And I couldn't figure out what about me was different doing a fifth step. What's different about me? I wrote this stuff down on a piece of paper and I read it to my sponsor, and he never judged and he didn't ask a single question. And by the way, if you're a sponsor and you're doing your fifth step, your job is not to analyze what the person wrote on the page. We have to stay within what we know, which is the 12 steps and 12 traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous. If you step out of that realm and begin to psychoanalyze what your sponsee has written on there, you better examine your motives. A fifth step is fairly easy to do. But what I noticed is that as a result of doing the fifth step, only one thing happened to me. One tangible thing that was scary and beautiful at the same time. I lost my armor. I'm an alcoholic who wore armor my whole life. You couldn't get to me. You can't get to me because I have a full set of armor on. And when I wrote all of this stuff down and gave it all away to my sponsor, I lost my armor. If you're lucky in these programs, once you lose your armor, it never comes back. Never comes back. And the way you ensure that it never comes back is that you work with other alcoholics. And you don't just work with them on their problems, you work the steps with other alcoholics to ensure that your armor doesn't, creep back and grow back. Because once your armor grows back, it not only protects you from the world, it shields the world from you. And you've already had enough sobriety to understand that I want the sweetness of the world. I want the pain of the world. I want all of that stuff. So I lost my armor. Now, what things look like now is different now that I don't have my armor, and I haven't had my armor for a lot of years. So it's well documented and well talked about that alcoholism is a disease of perception. So things look different to me than they do to you. And things look different to me most of the time. And so what happens now that I've lost my armor and I've done this fifth step is that I know how to humble myself and talk to somebody. When you do your fifth step, it's the first time you're talking to somebody about anything that's wrong with you. You know, you're not telling them about your assets, you're telling them about these bad things that you did. And so now, you know, because my perception now is very different than it was, 30 years ago. And what I think has changed so much over the years is how I look at things. But the problem is that I'm almost 37 years sober, and I think I'm supposed to know things. And I think that you think I'm supposed to know things. And that's even worse, because I don't really know anything. Nothing. And what I have to do is when I get to a place in my life where I don't understand something or I'm disturbed about something, I have to go and find somebody I trust to talk to them. It's an immediate thing. It's an immediate thing, and I don't hold back. And the reason I don't hold back is that I am not going to be a sober alcoholic who lives in pain. I'm not. I'm absolutely not. So, August is usually a rough month for me. We'll get into this later on in step 11, but my husband was killed in September. Long time ago, but September, and on my sober anniversary. So it comes up every September the 8th. And somewhere around August, I begin to do this ritual with myself that says I get to make a decision every September on my anniversary. And I can spend the day, he was the love of my life. I can spend the day thinking about him and how wonderful a life we had and how unbelievably violent he died, violently. Or I can spend the day celebrating the joy through the sorrow that I have reached 37 years of continuous sobriety with all the shit that happened to me. You're going to bleep that out, right? Okay, good. With all the stuff that happened to me, I can say, but what I do is I give myself the respect of making that decision every year. Every year. And it starts in August. And I begin to read, and I begin to pray differently, and I talk to God differently, and I talk to people differently. And some years, August flies by, and nothing happens. And the next thing I know, my anniversary is here, and I'm like, okay, I decided, live the joy, because it's absolutely perfect. That's not what's going on this year. What's been going on this year is I wake up in the morning, and I make my coffee, and I sit down, and I live over the water, and I look at the water, and I open my book to begin to read, and I can't stop crying. And I don't know where it's coming from, but I hear his voice, and I begin to think of memories, and I talk to God out loud, and I say, you have to stop me from crying. I can't keep doing this. I'm depleted. And every day. So you know what I didn't do? I didn't tell anybody. I didn't confide in anybody. So I sought someone out who was near to me. Finally, over the weekend, I sought someone who was near to me, who I know loves me and who I love and trust, but who doesn't think anything like I think. That's the most important thing. Don't find someone that's going to commiserate with you. Find someone who thinks differently. And I said, why can't I stop crying? And before I could say that, he said, we're not here to find the answers. We're here to sit in the process. And that's it. And he said, because I know you and whatever's going on is emanating from God. So you can't force anything here. And as he's talking to me and as I'm talking to him, I begin to feel this weight lift. And I'm getting lighter and lighter and lighter at the table. And I woke up this morning and I didn't cry at all. So don't tell me the fifth step doesn't work. It works every time we do it. Anyway, by the way, if you're, I'm pretty much set straight this whole conversation. But if you're waiting for God to set you straight, you'll be waiting a long time. It's not going to happen. God's not going to jump out of a garbage can and say, I'm going to set you straight. It doesn't work that way. And the reason it doesn't work that way is that we think, we're alcoholics, we think that every step that we do has like a purpose for it after we've done it. Like, this is what's going to happen. If you do this step, you're going to get that. When they tell us in the 12th step that we have to work the principles, and you do get a principle after each of the steps that you work. But the problem is that you really don't get anything after each step because they're all designed to do the same thing. They're just on this path to get you all the way to the end so that you have a spiritual awakening. That's the only reason why they're there. They're not there individually. There's no individual reward for doing the 4th step or the 5th step or 6 or 7 or any of them. They're just steps that you're going up and going up. So at the end, you have a spiritual awakening. And by the way, it says that's the only thing you get from doing the steps. You don't get anything else. You just get a spiritual awakening. That's it. That's the only result. And so in step 5, what we get as a principle of step 5 is the most bizarre and alien principle imaginable. It's integrity. Is there a more bizarre word to give to an alcoholic than integrity? I mean, I didn't know anything about it. I didn't even know I didn't even know what it was. And so I had to do, a lot of work on this. And basically it said to me that in step 4, I had to get honest with myself. And in step 5, I had to get honest with you. And those are two completely different things. I didn't think I was capable of being honest with myself, and I really didn't want to be honest with another human being. And so I started thinking about integrity and how we, find it and what we do with it, and how do you tell the difference between integrity and honesty? Because they sound alike. They sound like they're the same, but they're really not. Everybody hear the expression, rigorous honesty is not the same as rigorous publicity? We can be very honest and we can be showmen at the same time. We can get up here. I'm sure you've heard many, many speakers get up and do a whole show up here, and a song and dance. They make you laugh and all of that. And I'm sure that it's honest, but is it filled with integrity? And so I had to do a lot of work on this because they're telling me that I get integrity as a principle after I do the 5th step. Where is it? Where is it? Where do I find integrity? Well, the first place you find it is in the rooms of AA. Look around. You have people that you have hundreds of people in a room and nobody knows anybody else. You pass the basket around, you put money in. That's not just honesty, that's integrity. And the difference is that when you have integrity, your motives are pure. That is not the same thing as being honest. You can be honest and have some pretty crappy motives. But integrity, you have to take a look at your motives. So in the rooms of AA, so that's where you find your piece of integrity. I know I was 4 months sober in the rooms of AA, and first thing first in my home group. And one of my largest character defects, and believe me, it was on my list, is that I always seem to sound like I know what I'm talking about. And this is 4 months of sobriety. 4 months, and I'm raising my hand, and I'm talking like I've been there 40 years, and they just love me. And so it's still the largest group in Manhattan, not en masse, but they have 16 meetings every morning. And so they're all considered, first things first, and they have these large elections, and you get voted in. And anyway, they voted me in as the treasurer. And I thought that was a wonderful idea because I had bills to pay. And and so this is what I would do. I mean, you can make your own decisions about me, but this is what I would do. The baskets would go around, and I would get the money from all the meetings. All the meetings. It's the wealthiest meeting in Manhattan. I'd get all the money, and instead of going to the bank to deposit, I went to the other bank, the one with my name on it, and I deposited it to that account. And then I would do my month and pay my bills and be an upstanding citizen. And then somewhere around the 3rd week of the month, I would get paid for whatever work I was doing. And I would take that money, and then I would go to the first bank, and I would deposit it into their bank account. I thought it was a great system. I thought everybody was happy. I thought everybody was satisfied. And I thought that was the way to go. And then I made one pivotal error. I told my sponsor what I was doing. And he said to me, that's stealing. And I absolutely not. This is not stealing. And, if you're an alcoholic like me, you know how to rationalize. This is not stealing. I didn't spend the money. I replaced the money. He says, it's stealing. He said, so this is what's going to happen now, because in AA, this is where you learn about integrity. and you have done your 5th step. So there is no choice for you here. I want you to go to the meeting tomorrow, and I want you to stand up and say, my name is Carin, and I'm an alcoholic, and I stole your money. And I said, I really don't think that's the truth, so it's hard for me to say that. So the next day I went to the meeting, and I raised my hand, and I said, my name is Carin, I'm an alcoholic. I have to resign as your treasurer because according to my sponsor, I stole money. And this room, you could hear a pin drop in the room. And I said, all the money's in the bank. And I started to explain it. And he stands up, he goes, you've said enough. And I sat down, and everyone's looking at each other. And a guy in the back of the room, you can't write this stuff. Guy in the back of the room raised his hand, and he goes, my name is Patrick, and I was the treasurer before Carin, and I stole money. And so this is how it has worked for me in Alcoholics Anonymous. And so, they fired me as treasurer. And you know something? This stuff goes deep, very deep. I not only have never been treasurer again, ever. That's a long time not to be treasurer. I don't collect the money. I don't touch the money. I throw my dollar in the basket, so I'm not touching your money. And that, and then years later, of course, it occurred to me that when Bill Wilson was writing the promises in there, that he talks about, the promises are fairly innocuous language. We're going to get better, we're going to feel better, things are going to slip away, you're going to be more interested in other people. But money will cease to be a game changer for you. And then I realized that, money is a game changer for all alcoholics. All alcoholics. And there was plenty of money in there on my 5th step. Plenty of money. Some of those amends, financial amends, I was never able to make. People died and things like that. But the reality is, what I know now is that Carin and money don't mix in AA. And it's funny because I grew up in a house with a lot of money. And my father used to say to me all the time, if you have a problem in life, Carin, and it's money, don't worry about it. That's the best problem you could have. Just go out and make more money. He says, but if you have other problems, real problems, then you have real problems. So I have been skewed about money for a very long time, and I'm 70 years old and I'm still working. And I don't need to work, but I do like that money coming in, and because I am an alcoholic, I'm much better with money than I was when I did this 5th step, but it was in there. So a couple of other things that I want to blow by talking about this 5th step and how it changed me after I did it. My son was on there. He's 39 years old now. He was 18 months old when I came into Alcoholics Anonymous. And I was drunk when I had him. More succinctly, I was high when I had him. And the things that happened to him in his first 18 years of his life with a drunken high mommy and a drunken high daddy, they were unspeakable. They were just unspeakable. And I didn't want to put them down. I didn't want to write about that. And my sponsor, Albert, said to me, if you don't write these things down, you will never learn to be a good parent. The only way you can learn to be a good parent is if you put these things down on paper and you give them to me and I throw them away and you just leave it alone. He told me right from the beginning, you have to take a look at your past when you're doing your 4th and 5th step, but don't stare at it. Don't stare at your past. And so I wrote those things down. My son at 18 months old was my first resentment. He's the first one on the list because they told me that if you have a child that you can't be drinking and you can't be using and you can't be doing any of those things. And I just didn't find that acceptable. And so when we were in the hospital and I gave birth to him, they knew I was already a high risk. I mean, they knew, the doctor knew about my using. And the nurse came over and said, this is how you feed a baby. I was not interested in what she was telling me on how a mother feeds a baby because this line after that said, and you have to watch what you ingest. because anything you ingest is going to go into the baby. And it didn't take me long to realize what my options were here. And so I chose plan B and said, here, you take him. And I left the hospital. You know, my son doesn't remember that. He has no memories of being left there. He has no memories of the doctors coming after us and returning the baby. You know, and I thought, at that time, why would you ever give that child back to us? I mean, why would you do that? You know, but 18 months later, I got sober and I got clean. And his father did not, and he never did. But when I had to put those things down on a fifth step, I put them down not as confession. I want to make that clear. I put them down because I was told if I put them down that I would be a better mother. And I didn't know how to be a better mother. And Albert said, this is how you start. You know, so in doing the fifth step over and over again, I keep mentioning this, that it's not the actual act of doing the fifth step, of telling a new human being. It's easy. You might kill them afterwards, you can kill them afterwards. It doesn't matter. They don't have to be alive after you do your fifth step, you know. I mean, that's really how I felt about it. You know, I have 45 in my pocket. Here's my fifth step, boom. But if I wanted to change who I was, if I wanted to free myself from the things I had done and the people I had run over, and the illegal acts and the legal acts that I had done, I had to give it away to someone. So that being said, I want to tell you that twice in my life, I have heard a fifth step, both times from different women. What they told me was so horrible that I couldn't contain it. I couldn't accept it. And I say this because I'm hoping that everybody in here will eventually be working the steps with other people. And you're going to hear these fifth steps, and you're not going to yawn. And I heard these two women on two separate occasions, and, you know, I swear to God, I don't remember anything anybody says. I remember what they said. I remember every single word that came out of both of these women's mouths, because I didn't think it was possible for someone to say what they were saying. And they left. You know, we prayed and we did the whole thing, and they left. And I went right over to see my sponsor, and I said, I have to give you something I can't hold on to. You know, I had to give it away to somebody else. So they did a fifth step, and then I did a fifth step with whatever information I was given. And the reason I did that is what I know now is not the act of doing an additional piece of a fifth step, but it was an act that enabled me to be a better sponsor. Because as long as I was holding on to that information about these two women, I would never be able to sponsor them without judgment. I would never be able to sponsor them without fear, without disgust, without all the things that I heard when they were talking. That's why we do the fifth step. It's the result. It's not the action. It's so easy. Pick any schmagegi and do it with. It doesn't really matter. It can be your sponsor. It can be the guy sitting next to you. It can be your priest or your rabbi. And I probably wouldn't tell a rabbi. I don't think they would get it. But, you know, it can be any of your clergy people, you know, that you want. But the reality is that's not the point. And that's the point that I want to put out here tonight, that isn't the point. So I find that, you know, they read this thing in the book. I actually wrote this thing down. I never really quote from the book, but this thing really gets to me. You know, the fifth step is our first conscious attempt to reach God, which is weird because we don't maybe even call him God, and we don't know who we're talking to. But it's our first attempt because you're talking to somebody you don't know who they are. You know, you can tell your sponsor, and then you tell yourself in the fifth step, and then you got to tell God, or you got to tell somebody, whatever that is, and you wind up sitting in a room talking in the air. You know, literally talking to the ceiling, talking to the floor, whatever it is you want. You know, I had long since come to understand that if I was going to do this right, that God or whatever I believed in was going to have my back. I lean hard. I don't have little issues. I don't have little problems. I need a strong, bulky thing that I can lean on that was in my corner. And so wherever I was, and this is true to this day, I say it all the time, that I see where the ceiling hits the wall, and there's a corner. And that's where I talk to God all the time. Even though I know God is living within me, that's where I choose. I don't want to look like a loony and just be talking to myself all the time. So I put it out there. And I talk to God all the time, you know, out there, because I don't know what else to do. Because that's what they told me, that there's some type of a thing that happens to you in the fifth step, a thing that makes you a believer or introduces you to a God, and you have these changes. And while I'm doing the fifth step, I'm not getting any of that. I'm not getting that. And at the end, Albert said to me, "Are you done?" I said, "I don't know what that means." You know, if you used, by the way, and I'm sure we have many people here that are dually whatever, if you used the way I used, if you drank the way I drank, you remember 50% of what went on. 50%. And then you have the good luck of staying sober for 3 decades and remembering everything else. Because it does come back to you. And so when they talk about it, and we'll talk about this when we get to the 9th step, when it talks about that it's a lifelong process, that's why it's a lifelong process. Because the longer you go on, the more that you remember. So there's a part of the book that says that you might feel God. You might feel him. And you shouldn't be surprised, provided you hold back nothing. And providing your sense of relief, and you hold back nothing, your sense of relief will mount from minute to minute. And I understood that. I understood that. When I came into AA, into my home group, and I think I've explained what this room looked like, but we had all these handmade signs everywhere on the walls, and in a language I didn't understand. I didn't know what halt was. Who talks like that? I didn't know what kiss was. I mean, speak English. I didn't know what any of those things were, but there was one sign in the back on the right. It's still there. When people go, I have a lot of sponsees that go to New York just to do some New York AA, and they go to my home group and they take a picture of that sign and they send it to me so I know they've been to First Things First. And it says simply, "One day you will know a peace that surpasses all understanding." And that's what I felt when I finished writing all of these things down and talking to somebody else about it, because he said the 2 words to me that I never thought I'd hear. He said, "You're done." I thought, oh my God, I'm done. Of course, until I remember more, but I was done for the moment. I think that this happens to everybody who does this step. It's my opinion. In some form. You may not be as overwhelmed or smacked on the head, you know, with a God brick. You may just feel a little bit different. You may feel a little lighter. You may be looking at somebody that you can trust that you couldn't trust anybody beforehand. I think everybody who does this step thoroughly and who doesn't lie and who doesn't hold back and who doesn't embellish and just seeks the truth is going to feel something afterwards. And it's a good thing, because you're about to be catapulted into this place that who the hell wants to go there? When you go into your 6th and 7th step, your entire world will change. So I want to close with a few comments that I've been thinking about lately. You know, in the Big Book, 12 and 12 was written 15 years after the Big Book. I'm not sure. I mean, if anybody does that kind of math. And, you know, I make things up when I don't know what the truth is. And so I'm making up what I think happened. I don't think Bill drank or anything, but I'm making it up that he had some type of another white light experience and said, I didn't do such a good job with the Big Book, and now I want to write the 12 and 12 so that you really can do these steps. And if you notice, you know, 6 and 7, you know, these teeny tiny paragraphs in the Big Book, and then you get to, you know, the 12 and 12, and I don't even understand how they're written the way they're written. It's just like the same thing over and over again with different words. But the truth is that in the Big Book, when it was written, they talk about progress. They talk about spiritual progress, not perfection. It's all over the book. Progress, not perfection. And whatever happened to Bill, and I make it up because I don't know, but whatever happened to Bill in those 15 years later that he went back and wrote the 12 and 12, and all they do is talk about perfection. From the beginning of the book until the end of the book, that we are seeking perfection. And I don't know about you, but if you're an alcoholic like me, that's scary. That's scary. Because the alcoholic definition of perfection is not being perfect. It is being painfully aware of our imperfections. And that's a big difference. So we're going to close tonight and get ready for a rousing step 6 next week. God, I hope I didn't scare you away. But see you next week. Bye. That's on tape. Okay. Thank you all. It's a great day to be sober. We'll see you next week.